So, it is July 1919, and I really want you to just picture the scene for a second.
Okay, set the stage.
We are inside the massive, like, honey-colored limestone walls of Highclere Castle in Hampshire, England.
Which, for those of you who know your television history, yes, that is the exact filming location for Downton Abbey.
Exactly, it's Downton, and upstairs in this grand hall, there's an orchestra playing a sweeping Chopin waltz. You've got British aristocrats gliding across the floor in crimson and sapphire silk gowns, drinking Pol Roger champagne.
Very lavish.
Right, and they are aggressively, like, desperately trying to pretend that the trauma of the Great War never happened.
Just sweeping it all under the rug.
Totally. But downstairs, far away from the music, there's a young woman named Lady Evelyn Herbert. And she is sneaking into this dimly lit, perfectly silent library.
He's literally dodging her own debutante ball.
Yes, she's hiding.
Yeah.
And waiting for her by a desk that actually used to belong to Napoleon, by the way, is a man who is about to hand her a tiny blue stone beetle.
And that little beetle is going to completely upend, 3,000 years of patriarchal history.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive.
It's just such an incredible starting image. We're unpacking the historical fiction novel Daughter of Egypt by Marie Benedict today.
Right.
And that scene perfectly encapsulates the mission we have for this deep dive. We are exploring the dual, intersecting timelines of two real, highly influential historical women.
Women who are separated by what, millennia?
Millennia, exactly.
Yeah.
But they're somehow fighting the exact same battle. On one side, we have Lady Evelyn Herbert in the 1920s, and on the other, we have the female pharaoh Hatshepsut in the 15th century BC.
It's wild to think about.
It is. And for you listening, this isn't just, a recount of dusty tombs.
Definitely not.
It is fundamentally an exploration of who is granted the power to write history, who gets systematically erased from it, and how we can train ourselves to spot the deliberate blank spaces in the narratives we're handed every single day.
I love that. So let's unpack that library scene first, because it really sets the stakes for everything else.
Yeah, let's do it.
Evelyn is the daughter of the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. Her mother, Lady Elmina, is this fiercely determined Rothschild heiress.
Right.
And the irony of this lavish debutante ball is that literally just a year prior, Highclere Castle was a military hospital.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Lady Elmina actually funded it and ran it. The very rooms where these people are now waltzing were filled with nursing stations, wounded soldiers, just immense suffering.
That is quite the pivot.
It's a violent pivot. Because now that the war is over, Lady Elmina is entirely focused on the season. She wants to wrap Evelyn in tulle, thrust her onto the London marriage market, and secure a wealthy, titled husband.
And Evelyn is just suffocating under that expectation.
Completely.
She looks around the walls of Highclere at the family crests, the shields, the architectural triumphs of the estate, and she realizes something pretty chilling.
It is.
The only history being preserved and celebrated there is male. It's the earls who passed laws. It's the grandfathers who expanded the land. The women, the wives who managed the estates, the daughters, the maids who kept the place running, they've been entirely erased.
They're ghosts.
They are ghosts in their own home. Their legacies are reduced entirely to who they married and the heirs they produced.
Which is exactly why Evelyn flees the dance floor. She ducks into that library to meet Howard Carter.
Yes.
And Carter is, he's a notoriously stoic, brilliant archaeologist. He's been her father's excavation partner in Egypt for 13 years at this point.
Right.
But what Carter is holding in the shadows of that library isn't some massive, glittering artifact. It's not a golden death mask or a heavy electrum statue.
No, it's not flashy at all.
It is a 1-inch, blue-glazed soapstone scarab. Just a tiny carved beetle.
And the context of how they got this scarab is vital here. Lord Carnarvon had just been unpacking boxes of artifacts that had been sitting in dusty storage during the war. And when he saw this little soapstone piece, he practically tossed it aside. He deemed it completely unworthy of display in his fancy, custom-built glass cases.
Because it wasn't gold.
Exactly. Carnarvon's entire approach to archaeology is driven by aesthetics, by prestige. He wants the flashy, undeniable treasures that he can show off to his wealthy friends. A 1-inch piece of dull soapstone. It just didn't fit his narrative of a triumphant, glorious excavation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is the crux of the erasure we're talking about.
Hmm.
Evelyn and Carter have been secretly studying this rejected pile of quote-unquote worthless artifacts,
Right.
and Carter has just returned from a trip to London where he consulted with Wallace Budge.
The keeper of Egyptian and Assyrian antiquities at the British Museum.
Exactly. A
Right.
huge deal. And Budge confirmed something massive about this little blue beetle.
He confirmed the hieroglyphics inscribed on its underside. It bears the name of Hatshepsut.
But not just any name, right?
Right. Crucially, it is not the name she used when she became a reigning pharaoh. It bears her earlier title, for when she was a young princess and a high priestess. The inscription reads, God's wife of Amun,
Which changes everything about its archaeological value.
entirely,
Yeah.
because of where it was found.
Where was it found?
It was discovered in the mud and debris of the Valley of the Kings.
Okay, and for those who don't know, that's significant
Because the
because...
Valley of the Kings is a dry, rocky, incredibly desolate gorge where the reigning pharaohs were buried in hidden subterranean tombs. Hatshepsut has a massive, famous mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari.
Right, the one with the huge terraces.
Exactly. But her actual physical tomb had never been found. The prevailing thought was that she'd be buried near her temple.
Naturally.
But this tiny, discarded scarab bearing her pre-pharaonic title found in the Valley of the Kings suggests something revolutionary.
It suggests her undiscovered tomb might actually be hidden right there in the Royal Valley, mixed in with the great male kings of Egypt. I love the parallel Marie Benedict draws here. You have this tiny, easily overlooked object that actually holds the key to a massive historical mystery.
Right.
And holding it is Evelyn, a young woman who is also entirely overlooked by the men in charge.
Oh, the parallel is so strong.
Lord Carnarvon completely ignores Evelyn's fierce intellect. He focuses all his dynastic ambition and attention on his male heir, Portia, even though Portia couldn't care less about Egyptian history or the estate's legacy.
He just wants to race horses, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So Evelyn and the scarab are essentially one and the same in this moment.
They absolutely are. They both possess this quiet, world-changing historical weight. But the patriarchal figures controlling their environment are too blinded by flashy, conventional expectations to see their true value.
But I have to ask about Carter here, because he's an older man, an established professional, and she is the boss's teenage daughter.
Yeah, it's a tricky dynamic.
Right, so when he shares this information with her, is he just humoring her? Is this a patronizing, like, look what I brought you, little girl moment? Because that dynamic could very easily fall into a condescending trap.
It's a really great question, and the text is very deliberate in how it portrays their dynamic. Carter does not treat her like a naive debutante.
Okay.
During this library meeting, Evelyn looks at the scarab and correctly deduces that based on its wear and the material, it might have been a sacred burial object rather than a piece of daily jewelry.
Oh, wow.
And Carter's response is to explicitly call her his colleague. He calls her deduction an educated proposal.
Oh, man. You can practically feel her stop when he says that.
It is massive validation for
Yeah.
someone who's been told her only value is her marriageability.
Right.
Carter points out that she has put in the work. She knows the dynastic history, she can read the hieroglyphics, and she understands how these ritual objects functioned in antiquity.
He's been mentoring her.
Yeah, he has been quietly tutoring her for years, slipping her books and notes. And now he is inviting her to actively partner with him to trace this artifact's origin and find Hatshepsut's tomb.
That's incredible, but it perfectly highlights the central theme we're going to see echo across both timelines. It's a brilliant woman having to operate entirely in the shadows of men just to pursue her own intellect.
Literally hiding in a library.
Yes. Evelyn literally has to physically hide from her mother's matchmaking schemes behind a Napoleon desk just to have an academic conversation. That profound feeling of being trapped, of having your potential systematically stifled by the rigid expectations of your gender, that bridges the 3,000-year gap.
It really does.
Because that exact feeling brings us directly to the woman who originally owned that blue scarab.
Yes, to truly understand the immense, earth-shattering gravity of finding Hatshepsut's tomb, we have to leave 1919 Hampshire. We have to travel back to 1486 BC, to the ancient city of Thebes.
Okay, take us there.
We are stepping into the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom. And the reality of royal Egyptian bloodlines and succession at this time is deeply complicated
Yeah.
and intensely unforgiving.
It's essentially a gilded cage of genetics, right?
Exactly.
Hatshepsut is the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and his primary great royal wife, Queen Oms. Now, in ancient Egypt, the strongest royal bloodline had to be preserved and concentrated, and they usually did this through intermarriage within the family.
Right.
Hatshepsut had full brothers, but the historical record shows they died young, which leaves Hatshepsut as the royal child with the absolute strongest, purest dynastic bloodline in the entire kingdom.
But the patriarchal structure of the state dictates that because she is a woman, she cannot simply inherit the throne.
Right.
When her father, Thutmose I, dies, the crown does not pass to his brilliantly educated, pure-blooded daughter. It goes to Thutmose II.
Who is Hatshepsut's half-brother.
Yes.
He was born to a secondary wife, a woman from the royal harem named Mutnafret. So his bloodline is considered lesser or diluted compared to Hatshepsut's.
Precisely. And to legitimize his somewhat shaky claim to the throne, the court apparatus forces a solution. Thutmose II must marry Hatshepsut. Yeah. Her pure blood will cement his right to rule.
Talk about a horrific loss of autonomy. I mean, she goes from being a highly educated princess who holds the incredibly powerful title of God's wife of Amun.
Which is a huge deal.
Right. It's a priestly role where she practically runs her own massive agricultural estates and performs the sacred, highly exclusive daily rituals to wake the chief god. She goes from that to being forced into a painfully public marital bed with her half-brother simply to act as a royal incubator for an heir.
And making matters worse, Thutmose II is widely viewed by historians and depicted in the text as a remarkably weak, insecure ruler.
Oh boy.
Yeah. When a pharaoh lacks natural authority, they often overcompensate with performative cruelty.
Practical.
The sources detail a specific moment during his reign where a rebellion occurs down south in the region of Kush. To prove his strength to his generals and the populace, Thutmose II orders a horrific, theatrical display of violence.
What does he do?
He commands his armies not just to defeat the rebels, but to take the body of a rebel leader, hang it upside down on the prow of the royal barge, and sail it slowly up and down the Nile until it rots in the sun.
Oh my God. Okay, so he's essentially the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a guy buying a massive lifted truck he has absolutely no idea how to drive, just to prove to everyone how tough he is.
That is a very apt, if slightly less gruesome, analogy.
It screams insecurity, but it's a dangerous insecurity. Hatshepsut, observing all of this from the sidelines, realizes that a weak, reactive pharaoh endangers everyone.
Absolutely.
It destabilizes the economy, it invites foreign invasion, and most intimately, it endangers their young daughter, the Princess Nefer. Hatshepsut knows she has to be the one operating behind the scenes, pulling the levers of statecraft, just to maintain basic stability.
And her precarious situation shatters completely when Thutmose II dies relatively young.
Okay, so she's gone.
He's gone. The political vacuum is immediate, and in an ancient court, a vacuum means blood. The throne passes to Thutmose III. But Thutmose III is an infant, and he's the son of Thutmose II and a minor woman from his harem named Iset.
So another diluted bloodline.
Exactly. And an infant obviously cannot rule, command armies, or perform the necessary religious rites. So Hatshepsut steps in as queen regent.
But being regent is a temporary, highly vulnerable position, isn't it?
Very. The court is swarming with sycophantic viziers, ambitious generals, and powerful priests of Amun, all looking to exploit the infant king and seize power for their own factions.
It's like a Shark Tank.
It is. Hatshepsut knows that the moment Thutmose III comes of age, or the moment a rival faction gains enough military backing, she and her daughter will likely be exiled or assassinated to tie up loose ends.
Wow, so she has a ticking clock.
A very loud ticking clock. So she decides that operating in the shadows is no longer enough, and she pulls off what has to be one of the most brilliant, audacious political masterstrokes in human history.
I am so ready for this. What does she do?
She orchestrates a bloodless coup. And she does it by weaponizing the most fundamental concept of ancient Egyptian society, Ma'at.
Okay, let's pause and really explain Ma'at, because if you don't understand Ma'at, you don't understand Hatshepsut. What exactly is this concept?
Ma'at is often translated simply as truth or justice, but it's much bigger than that. It is the ancient Egyptian concept of universal balance and cosmic order.
Like the physics of their spiritual universe.
Yes. The gods establish Ma'at at the moment of creation to stave off the chaotic void. And the primary overriding job of the living pharaoh is to maintain Ma'at.
And if they fail?
If a pharaoh fails, the Nile is in flood. The crops fail, plagues strike, and the kingdom falls into absolute terrifying chaos.
Right, so Hatshepsut knows she can't just stage a violent military takeover. That would violate Mott and turn the populace against her.
Exactly. It would look like chaos.
Instead, she gathers the male elite, the priests and the nobles, and she claims a direct, undeniable divine vision. Remember, she holds that title, God's wife of Amun. She is the highest priestess.
She is the only person allowed to physically enter the innermost sanctuary of the temple at Karnak and lift the veil on the sacred statue of the god Amun.
And she uses that exclusive access. She announces to the court that during her sacred, secluded trance, Amun spoke directly to her.
And the claim she makes is breathtaking in its scale. She doesn't just say Amun likes her. She claims a divine birth.
Wait, like literally?
Literally. She states that Amun actually visited her mother, Queen Ams, disguised as Thutmose I, and impregnated her. Therefore, Hatshepsut is not just royal, she is literally half divine.
Oh, that is so bold.
And furthermore, she claims Amun explicitly commanded her to take the throne to protect the kingdom and maintain Mott.
Which is a brilliant trap for the male priests.
It's checkmate.
How do you argue with the chief god of the pantheon as reported by his highest, most intimately connected priestess? If they call her a liar, they are questioning the very religious structure that gives them their own power.
Exactly, but she doesn't just rely on spiritual intimidation. She backs it up with hard legal historical precedent.
She does her homework.
She really does. She works with her most trusted advisor, a brilliant commoner who rose through the ranks named Senenmut.
Senenmut, I've heard that name.
Yes. Senenmut is her chief architect, her daughter's tutor, and the text and historical whispers heavily imply Hatshepsut's lover.
Scandalous, but I love it.
Together, they dig deep into the temple archives. They find records of previous female rulers who stepped up during times of crisis, specifically Queen Sobneferu from the Middle Kingdom about 300 years prior.
Okay, so she has precedent.
They present images of Sobneferu ruling with full pharaonic authority.
So she builds this flawless multi-pillar defense. She has the religious mandate, the bloodline superiority, and the legal historical precedent. And she chooses the absolute perfect, most theatrical moment to spring this on the public. The Opet Festival.
Oh, the Opet Festival was the most important event of the Theban calendar. It was a massive, multi-day celebration of divine rebirth and agricultural fertility.
Like a giant state fair and religious holiday combined.
Exactly. The statues of the gods were paraded on glorious river barges down the Nile from Karnak to Luxor. The entire city, from the highest nobles to the poorest farmers, was feasting and celebrating. The energy was electric.
And right in the middle of this peak religious fervor, Hatshepsut steps out before the masses. But she is not dressed in the sheer linen shift of a queen regent. She steps out wearing the Etef crown.
Which is a visual shockwave.
Wait, pause for a second. The Etef crown, paint a picture for me, because to a modern listener, a crown is just a crown. What does this thing actually look like, and why is it such a massive transgression for a woman to put it on her head?
Okay, imagine a tall, bulbous, conical white centerpiece. That's the head,
Right.
the crown of a regent.
Okay, a tall white cone.
Now, flanking that white cone on either side are two stiff vertical ostrich feathers, and often it has a golden solar disk at the base, sometimes paired with ram horns.
Wow, that's intense.
It is a large, towering, incredibly imposing piece of headgear. But more importantly, it is the specific crown associated with Osiris, the god of the underworld and resurrection. It is the ultimate symbol of supreme divine male rulership.
I see.
When a woman places that specific arrangement of feathers and gold on her head, she is not saying, I am in charge for now. She is saying, I am the living embodiment of the divine king. I am Pharaoh.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you read these sources and look at this maneuver, you have to ask yourself, was this elaborate story of a divine birth and a vision from Amun a cynical, deeply calculated political lie designed solely to grab power? Or did she, existing in this incredibly devout, religiously saturated society, genuinely believe that the gods wanted her to step up and rule?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to strip away our modern secular cynicism. In ancient Egypt, the spiritual and the political were not two different spheres of life. They were the exact same thing. For Hatshepsut, the political reality was that if she fell from power, rival factions like the descendants of the harem wives would seize control. And in ancient politics, a deposed royal line isn't just retired, they are eliminated.
They're wiped out.
Her daughter Neferu would almost certainly be killed to prevent future uprisings. Therefore, from Hatshepsut's perspective, securing her own absolute power was the only way to maintain cosmic order. It was the only way to maintain Maat.
Because chaos meant death for her family.
Exactly. In her mind, her power grab was simultaneously an act of fierce maternal survival and national salvation. The gods demanded order, therefore the gods demanded her.
That is such a vital distinction. She wasn't acting out of pure megalomania. She felt she was literally holding the universe together for her child, and history proves she was incredibly competent at it. Her reign wasn't a disaster. It brought massive economic prosperity. She reestablished long-lost, lucrative trade routes to the land of Punt, bringing back myrrh and frankincense. And she initiated breathtaking building projects, all without relying on the constant bloody warfare that defined her predecessors. She proved a woman could maintain Maat.
But jumping forward 3,000 years, from the sun-drenched courts of ancient Thebes to the suffocating drawing rooms of the 1920s, we see that Evelyn is trying to pull off her own exhaustive political maneuvering.
Yeah, quite the shift.
And her goal isn't to rule an empire. She just wants permission to dig in the dirt to find the woman who did.
Evelyn's political battlefield isn't a temple, it's the Cairo social scene. Evelyn and her parents have traveled to Egypt for the winter excavation season, but Lady Almina refuses to let Evelyn simply go live in a dusty camp in the Valley of the Kings.
Absolutely out of the question for a debutante.
Right. To get her mother's permission to actually work on the site, Evelyn has to strike a brutal, exhausting bargain. For every day she spends out in the valley, she has to spend an equal amount of time enduring high society functions in Cairo.
It is the physical manifestation of the cages of aristocracy we talked about.
It really is.
Evelyn's desperate to do meaningful intellectual work, but she is constantly forced back into stiff silk dresses. She has to attend dances at Shepherd's Hotel, sip tea at the British High Commission residency, and make vapid small talk with wealthy expatriates.
Just mindless chatter.
Exactly. She is being paraded around for eligible bachelors, like a man named Lord Stockton, who completely dismisses her intellect and sees her only as a pretty acquisition.
But the contrast when she is finally allowed at the dig site is pure magic.
That's night and day.
The text vividly describes her waking up before dawn, the air still freezing, riding donkeys through the tawny, ochre desert hills as the sun rises. And she isn't just observing. She is the first English woman to ever work actively alongside the local Egyptian excavation teams.
And the mechanics of this dig are fascinating and deeply stratified. It's not just Howard Carter brushing sand with a tiny brush.
No, not at all.
It is a massive industrialized operation. They are using Decauville light railway systems, these narrow-gauge tracks with little metal carts, to haul away literal tons of limestone chips and debris.
Let's talk about the workforce, because this is where Evelyn really breaks the mold. Who is actually moving this sand?
The physical labor is done entirely by Egyptians. The specialized, highly skilled workers are called the kuftis, mainly because they traditionally came from the town of Kift, where they had been trained for generations in the delicate art of excavation by earlier archaeologists like Flinders Petrie.
Okay, so they're the experts.
Yes. Below them are the diggers using heavy hose called turia to break the compacted earth. And then there are the basket boys, often actual children, who carry away the rubble in woven palm baskets called maktaf.
Wow.
It is grueling, back-breaking work in intense heat and choking dust.
And overseeing all of the Egyptian workers is the head race, the foreman, a man named Mansour Mohammed el-Hashash. Right.
At first, Mansour is totally unnerved by Evelyn, and you can't blame him. An English lord's teenage daughter showing up in trousers wanting to dig in the dirt. He assumes she's a fragile tourist who's going to get in the way or get hurt.
But she proves him wrong through sheer, unrelenting effort.
She really does.
She brings him breakfast, she respects his authority over the men, and she works tirelessly in the trenches, sifting through the dust until her hands are blistered. Slowly, she earns the grudging, genuine respect of Mansour and the Kuftis.
And that hard work pays off. They are hunting for the slightest anomaly in the valley floor, and they find one. They uncover a subtle ridge in the compacted sand that leads down to a set of roughly hewn stone stairs.
The anticipation there must have been incredible.
Right. And as they are clearing the rubble near these stairs, Evelyn brushes the dirt off a fragment of a travertine jar. She reads the hieroglyphics. On it is the name of Queen Ahmose-Nefertari.
Which is a massive electrifying clue.
Why is that name so important? Ahmose-Nefertari was the very first woman to hold the title God's Wife of Amun, and she was a revered ancestor of Hatshepsut's father. finding her name on a ritual jar near an undiscovered staircase in the valley. Carter and Evelyn are convinced. They feel they are inches away from the sealed door of Hatshepsut's tomb.
But just as they are on the precipice of this life-altering discovery, the harsh, ugly reality of archaeology under a colonial capitalist system crashes down on them.
Yep, the money runs out.
Archaeology isn't just about passion, it's about cash. And Lord Carnarvon is burning through his vast fortune. He is paying for the kuftis, the equipment, the permits, the logistics. And year after year, they haven't found a major, intact tomb filled with the kind of gold and spectacular artifacts that satisfy his financial needs and his massive ego.
He is ready to pull the plug entirely. He threatens to cut off all funding and surrender their concession, their legal right to dig in the valley.
So Howard Carter, the very man who mentored Evelyn, the man who called her his colleague, makes a wildly pragmatic, devastating pivot.
He really betrays their mission.
He goes to Carnarvon and suggests they abandon the hunt for Hatshepsut entirely. He wants to move the dig to a small, cramped area near the later tomb of Ramses VII.
And why on earth would he abandon a female pharaoh who ruled a golden age for a cramped patch of dirt?
Good question.
Because Carter has a hunch that he might find the tomb of a relatively minor, historically insignificant boy king named Tutankhamun in that spot.
Ah, Tut?
Tutankhamun's reign was short and barely a blip historically, but Carter believes the tomb might be unrobbed. An unrobbed tomb means intact gold. Gold means Carnarvon keeps writing the checks.
I want to frame this for a modern listener because the heartbreak Evelyn feels here is profound. Imagine you are part of a passionate, brilliant tech startup.
Okay, I'm tracking.
You and your team have spent years developing a world-changing medical device. It could save millions of lives. It is your life's work. But the venture capitalist funding you is getting bored. He wants a quick, flashy return on his investment. So, the lead engineer, your mentor, unilaterally pivots the entire team. He abandons the medical device to build a highly profitable, incredibly generic dating app just to keep the lights on and the funding flowing.
Wow. That is so depressing.
It's entirely practical from a business standpoint, but it is deeply, fundamentally soul-crushing for the people who believed in the original mission.
That is a perfect analogy. Evelyn is watching the history of this monumental, trailblazing female ruler be pushed aside and buried yet again.
Yeah.
And she's being passed over in favor of a male pharaoh whose only real historical value is the potential for gold, simply because hunting for him was a better financial bet.
It's just so frustrating.
It demonstrates with brutal clarity how financial constraints, controlled entirely by wealthy European men, literally dictated which histories were unearthed, which stories were told, and which women were left buried in the dark.
But Evelyn's realization that her father's noble archaeological pursuit is actually largely driven by a hunt for financial spoils opens her eyes to something much, much bigger.
Yes.
While Evelyn, Carter, and Carnarvon are arguing over which dead pharaoh to dig up, a massive, explosive geopolitical earthquake is happening right outside the quiet walls of the Valley of the Kings.
The Egyptian fight for independence.
Exactly.
To understand the absolute powder keg our characters are operating in during 1919, we have to look at the historical backdrop the text provides. For centuries, Egypt had been a province of the Ottoman Empire. Then, in the late 1800s, the British effectively occupied the country.
Right.
They did this primarily to secure strategic influence, specifically to control the newly built Suez Canal, which was the vital shipping artery to their empire in India.
And when World War I broke out in 1914, Britain officially declared Egypt a protectorate. They essentially annexed it.
He took it over.
Yeah. And during the war, the British military heavily, ruthlessly utilized Egyptian resources. They requisitioned Egyptian grain, causing local food shortages. They confiscated thousands of Egyptian camels and donkeys for military transport.
Leaving the farmers with nothing.
Right. And most devastatingly, they conscripted hundreds of thousands of Egyptian peasants into the Egyptian labor corps to build pipelines and railways for the British Army under brutal conditions.
This heavy-handed wartime exploitation deeply seeded a fierce, unified Egyptian nationalism. By the time the war ends in 1918, the Egyptian people have had enough. A prominent lawyer and politician named Saad Zaghlou forms a delegation of the Wafd Party and formally demands that the British grant full autonomy and independence to Egypt.
The British respond with classic imperial arrogance. They arrest Saad Zaghlou and exile him to Malta.
Bad move.
A terrible move. And that is the spark that ignites the powder keg. The entire country erupts in the 1919 revolution. There are massive protests in the streets of Cairo, railway lines are sabotaged, telegraph wires are cut, and national strikes paralyze the economy.
And this isn't just a distant, abstract background detail in the novel. It physically and terrifyingly impacts the characters. At one point, Evelyn and her parents are traveling through the city of Port Said. Their automobile is suddenly surrounded by thousands of marching, shouting protesters.
That must have been terrifying for them.
The rage against the British is palpable. They barely manage to push through the crowd and board their ship to escape the country, realizing just how precarious their position as British aristocrats has become.
But what is truly incredible about this revolution and what deeply inspires Evelyn is who steps up to lead it. With Saad Zaghloul exiled in Malta, the movement doesn't collapse. It is spearheaded by his wife, Safiya Zaghloul. She rapidly becomes known as the mother of the Egyptians.
Safiya Zaghloul's emergence was a seismic shift in Egyptian society. She was the daughter of a former prime minister. As a woman of the elite class, she had lived her entire life in Purda.
Let's explain Purda for those who might not be familiar with the term.
Purda was the traditional, deeply entrenched social practice of keeping women in completely separate, private spaces. Women of her class were hidden away from public life, veiled when outside, and strictly separated from any men who weren't immediate family members. It was a life of extreme seclusion and controlled silence.
But when her husband is taken, she doesn't retreat further into the shadows. She steps completely out of Purda.
It's a massive risk.
Huge. She turns her home into the headquarters for the revolution. She organizes strikes, she drafts political manifestos, and most astonishingly, she mobilizes women from every single tier of society.
Crossing all those social boundaries.
She unites Coptic Christian women and Muslim women. She brings together elite pashas' wives who arrive in carriages and the working-class peasant women from the countryside. They were all marching together side by side, demanding freedom from the British.
And Evelyn, reading about this in the papers, is captivated. She manages to secure a secret interview with Madame Zaghloul. Evelyn lies to her father, sneaks out of the hotel, and poses as an assistant to a bold, unconventional American writer named Mrs. Seton. Together, they go to the Zaghloul residence.
I love this scene so much. Evelyn sits there, a British aristocrat's daughter, taking frantic notes while Safiya Zaghloul calmly explains that she stepped out of her safe, secluded life not for personal glory, but because her destiny was to serve as her husband's second self and to fight for her country's right to exist on its own terms.
It perfectly mirrors Hatshepsut.
Exactly. Hatshepsut stepping in to rule for her infant stepson to maintain Mat.
The insight Madame Zaghloul provides during this interview is profound, and it cuts right to the heart of the colonial arrogance Evelyn has been raised in. Madame Zaghloul notes that English women, and by extension the British Empire, never actually attempt to know Egyptian women.
They just project onto them.
Right. They look at the veils and make sweeping assumptions based on preconceived Orientalist notions without ever trying to understand their deep past, their complex present, or their ambitions for the future. And then she delivers this incredibly powerful defining quote about the women of Egypt.
What does she say?
She says, "We are like the desert sand. We are walked upon every day by people who are oblivious to our fine yet strong grains and who take our presence for granted. But then one day we will sweep up into a mighty storm and transform the land."
It gives me chills every time I read it, the desert sand sweeping up into a storm.
So powerful.
And Evelyn, standing there, immediately connects this immense political awakening to the quiet, dusty archaeology happening in the valley. She recalls a conversation where her uncle Aubrey had warned her father about the changing political tides. Aubrey warned that an independent, fiercely nationalist Egypt would absolutely not tolerate the old colonial system of partage.
All right, let's talk about partage. That was the legal framework of colonial archaeology. It essentially meant that whatever foreign archaeologists dug out of the ground, they got to split 50-50 with the Egyptian government.
Sounds fair in theory, but
in practice, it meant half of a nation's ancient heritage was legally boxed up and shipped off to London, Paris, or New York to sit in foreign museums or private mansions like Highclere.
Evelyn realizes, with a sickening drop in her stomach, that the British, including her own beloved father, are treating Egypt's sacred sovereign history as personal property. They aren't preserving history, they are hoarding it.
And this forces Evelyn into a brutal internal confrontation. She has to reconcile her lifelong burning passion for historical discovery with the sudden, highly uncomfortable realization that her very presence in that country, holding a trowel under the protection of the British flag, makes her an active participant in an oppressive colonial machine.
It's the moment you realize you might actually be the bad guy in someone else's story. Put yourself in Evelyn's shoes for a second. You have spent your entire life feeling suffocated by your gender. Your only escape, your only intellectual outlet, has been dreaming of finding Hatshepsut. And now you look around and realize that by digging her up and slapping a British Museum label on her, you aren't saving Hatshepsut. You are just kidnapping her.
You're doing the exact opposite of what you intended.
You are violating the very country you profess to love. It is a devastating moral conflict.
And that feeling of forced compromise, of an oppressive patriarchal power structure aggressively reclaiming control, links us perfectly and tragically to the climax of Hatshepsut's story.
Sadly, yes.
Just as the British Empire is ultimately forced to grapple with returning control to the Egyptian people, Hatshepsut is violently forced to return control to the patriarchal establishment of ancient Thebes.
We have to jump back over 3 millennia to ancient Thebes, around the year 1458 BC. Hatshepsut has ruled successfully, peacefully, and prosperously for over 2 decades. She has maintained
She did a great job.
But the male elite, the battle-hungry generals who want the spoils of war, and the conservative priests of Amun simply cannot abide the precedent of a successful female pharaoh. They aren't angry because she did a bad job. They're terrified because she did a great job.
They are terrified that Hatshepsut is going to elevate her brilliant daughter, Princess Neferu, to rule after her. If a line of female kings is established, the male monopoly on divine power is broken forever.
So Thutmose III, the infant stepson, who has now grown into a seasoned, ambitious military commander operating in her shadow, summons her. And he delivers a brutal, unforgiving ultimatum.
What does he tell her?
He informs her that the elite factions are moving against her. The military is behind him. He tells her that if she does not step down voluntarily and, crucially, consent to be entirely erased from the historical record, the rival factions will murder her daughter Neferu and her closest ally Senenmut to ensure the female royal line is severed permanently.
Hold on, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Because erasing a reigning pharaoh is the ultimate political coup. Is there actual hard archaeological evidence that Hatshepsut consented to her own erasure out of maternal sacrifice? Or is Marie Benedict, as an author, perhaps romanticizing what was actually just a violent, standard-issue patriarchal overthrow by a resentful stepson?
It's a fantastic question, and historians hotly debate this. For a long time, the dominant theory was that Thutmose III hated his stepmother and smashed her statues in a fit of misogynistic rage the moment she died.
That's the narrative I always heard.
Right. But modern archaeology has nuanced this. We now know the erasure didn't happen immediately after her death. It happened late in Thutmose III's reign. The author's interpretation that it was a negotiated sacrifice to protect her daughter's life during a tense transition of power is a highly compelling narrative choice.
It gives Hatshepsut agency in her final moments.
Exactly. It frames the erasure not as a victim's defeat, but as mother's ultimate strategic sacrifice.
And whether it was violently forced upon her or negotiated, the physical mechanics of this erasure are staggering to think about. How do you erase a pharaoh who has spent 20 years carving her name into granite?
It is a massive, state-sponsored industrial project. It's the tragedy of the chiseling. We aren't talking about scratching a name out of a ledger.
No, this is hard labor.
Thutmose III's stonemasons had to erect massive wooden scaffolding up the sides of 100-foot-tall granite obelisks at Karnak. They had to take heavy copper chisels and physically hack out the deep, sunken relief cartouches bearing her name without structurally compromising the obelisk itself. They smashed her beautiful limestone statues into pieces and threw them into quarries.
And it wasn't just her name, they went after the grammar. The Egyptian language is highly gendered. The Masons had to go through miles of hieroglyphic text and painstakingly alter the feminine pronouns.
Oh, the meticulousness of that.
They chipped away the T endings that denoted she and replaced them to read he, awkwardly reassigning her monumental achievements to Thutmose II.
They literally rewrote the grammar of history to pretend a female pharaoh had never existed. She allowed her legacy to be obliterated. She accepted historical silence so that her daughter's heart could keep beating.
It is utterly heartbreaking to be that powerful and still have to negotiate your own non-existence just to keep your child safe. And the sheer injustice of that erasure brings us crashing right back to the climax of the 1920s timeline.
It does. It is now 1923. Carter and Carnarvon actually did it. Carter's hunch was right. They found the sealed, unrobbed tomb of the boy king, Tutankhamun.
And the world goes completely, utterly insane. It is the first global media event of the 20th century. There are reporters camped out in the dust. Kings and queens from Europe are visiting the valley in their finery, and the artifacts being pulled out, the golden thrones, the chariots, the famous death mask, are mind-blowing in their wealth.
But the political situation surrounding this golden circus is incredibly tense. Britain has been forced to formally declare Egypt independent, though they still maintain a heavy military presence. The new Egyptian government, fueled by the nationalist pride of the 1919 revolution, views Tutankhamun not as a scientific curiosity, but as the ultimate symbol of a reborn sovereign Egypt. Saad Zaghloul, now back from exile and leading the government, claims the pharaoh entirely for the nation.
As he should.
Exactly. They are strictly controlling access to the tomb, heavily regulating the press, and flat out refusing to allow Lord Carnarvon to simply invoke the old partage laws and take half the artifacts back to Highclere Castle as his personal spoils.
Carnarvon is furious. He feels he bought and paid for this discovery. And then, in a twist of fate that spawned a century of mummy-cursed legends, Lord Carnarvon is bitten by an infected mosquito on his cheek.
Ah, the curse.
Yeah. He accidentally nicks the bite while shaving and becomes severely infected. And in the days before antibiotics, his health rapidly, catastrophically deteriorates. He develops pneumonia.
Evelyn rushes to his bedside in Cairo, and on his deathbed, weak, feverish, and desperate to secure his dynastic legacy, Lord Carnarvon begs Evelyn to do the unthinkable.
What does he ask her to do?
He knows the Egyptian government has legally locked them out of exporting the treasure, so he asks his daughter to illegally sneak back into the tomb, bypass the guards, and steal easily concealable, highly valuable artifacts. He wants her to smuggle them out of the country to fund Carter's future excavations and ensure the Carnarvon name remains supreme in the archaeological world.
He justifies this demand with the ultimate colonial mindset laid bare. He tells her, essentially, we found the tomb. We spent the British money. Therefore, we are entitled to the spoils regardless of what the local government says.
But Evelyn, who has spent her entire life idolizing this man, who has used his money and his influence as her only gateway into the world of intellectual freedom and archaeology, looks at her dying father, and she refuses.
Wow, good for her.
She actively defies him. She looks him in the eye and says, "They aren't ours to take."
It is the moment her political and moral awakening fully crystallizes. The words of Madame Zaghloul echo in her ears. The rights to the artifacts, the rights to the history of this land, were never the British's to take. They were only ever the Egyptians to give, and the Egyptian people have stood up and reclaimed them.
So, synthesizing all of this, Evelyn leaves Egypt shortly after her father's death. She returns to England, she eventually marries, and she walks away from archaeology entirely.
Right.
Her singular life's dream was to find the tomb of Hatshepsut, to validate this great female leader, and she just gives it up.
Right.
Looking at Evelyn walking away, it almost feels like archaeology itself was the villain here. Like she realized that by digging up Hatshepsut for a British museum, she wasn't saving her, she was just kidnapping her.
I think that's exactly the conclusion she reaches. She realizes that unearthing Hatshepsut under a colonial banner, claiming her body and her artifacts for British museums and British glory, would be a second unforgivable violation of the pharaoh.
A double erasure, almost.
Yes. Hatshepsut had already been violently erased by men who wanted to control her narrative in antiquity. Evelyn refuses to be part of a modern system that steals that narrative away from the modern Egyptian people. Walking away from the dig isn't a defeat. It is her greatest moral triumph. It's an act of profound, radical respect.
And the way she seals that decision is so poetic. Before she leaves, she takes that tiny 1-inch blue soapstone scarab, the artifact that Carter showed her in the library, the one bearing Hatshepsut's title as God's wife of Amun, the object that started this entire journey.
What does she do with it?
She walks down to the edge of the Nile River, away from the camps and the flashing cameras, and she presses that scarab deep into the wet mud, burying it back in the Egyptian earth. She is physically returning Hatshepsut to Egypt. She is leaving her story in the ground to be told by the Egyptian people whenever they are ready to tell it.
It's a beautiful full-circle moment that ties the millennia together. Daughter of Egypt masterfully weaves the political awakening of a stifled 1920s English aristocrat with the fierce political survival of an ancient Egyptian queen. It strips away the romanticism of archaeology and shows us that history is never a passive, static stone monument.
No, not at all.
History is aggressively curated, it is stolen, it is rewritten, And sometimes, as with Hatshepsut's erasure and Evelyn's refusal to dig, history is fiercely protected by silence.
Exactly. When we talk about history, we aren't just talking about the past.
No, we are talking about an active, ongoing narrative. And this raises an important question, the ultimate takeaway for anyone listening.
Hmm.
History is written by whoever currently holds the chisel.
Right.
When we read a textbook, when we walk past a bronze monument in a park, when we look at a museum exhibit, we can't just passively consume it. We have to actively ask ourselves, who paid to build this? Who was allowed to write the plaque? And more importantly, who did they have to scratch out to make their story the only one we see?
That is the absolute perfect question to leave you with today. If a ruler as magnificent, as economically successful, and as politically powerful as Pharaoh Hatshepsut could be almost entirely deleted from the face of the earth by a few men with copper chisels and fragile egos whose stories are being quietly erased from our modern world right now, simply because their existence doesn't fit the convenient narrative of whoever is currently in charge. What modern scarabs are waiting in the dirt for someone to find 3,000 years from now? Keep looking for the blank spaces. See you next time.